Good afternoon and welcome back to Jones & Company. I'm your host, Brian Jones. The show is brought to you today by MCR, Better Homes and Gardens, and Agio Digital. Today's guest is none other than Mario Carey, the founder and CEO of MCR, Better Homes and Gardens.
That's me.
Yes, thank you so much for joining me on the second segment. We were having such an interesting conversation, getting some background information on yourself, getting the lay of the land in terms of the real estate sector here. One question that usually, always comes up when we talk about economic development, real estate development in the country is, how are we going to develop our family islands, right? A concept you alluded to in the first segment, you mentioned the need to build communities, right? And that made me think maybe this is a concept that can be explored even, optimally on the family islands. What do you think?
Historically, family island developments have not been successful. And you need to sort of explore why, but there's so many moving parts to when somebody decides to take on a couple 100-acre development, say in Exuma or Eleuthera or Long Island. But the core elements of those developments tend to be proper airlift, which I think we can solve the problems, right?
Yes.
Imagine you go to Long Island, you have an airport that's been there since I was a kid and has no lights, right? And has no proper airport facilities, right? So developers need that type of thing. If you get the infrastructure, the roads, whatever. So proper airlift will help any development, and I think that the government has a plan to sort of work through the airports on our islands, and they're not cheap, right? But there's a business model there. Labor. Any type of family island development would demand as much local labor, but an open-mindedness to bring in foreign labor, because there's no way in order to be able to supply the necessary labor on a family island, right? So there's sensitivity to that area of work permits and what does that look like, and then how do you create housing. But what we do know is that the family islands need development.
Yes.
It needs to change. Nassau, is our city, and we're all sort of enjoying the success. But there's just so much opportunity out there, especially in the eco-friendly world. Because our family islands are our treasures, and developments need to be delicate in how they treat our economy and our environment.
That's right.
Right.
Certainly, the economic development on the family islands is, that's really critical to overall economic development in the country, right?
And it all feeds to the bottom line.
Right.
And again, what drives the Bahamas, because our land is still pretty affordable compared to the rest of the world.
Yes.
We speak the same language. Our dollar's on par. We're 30 minutes off the coast of the United States of America, but just proper airlift. For Kerzner to commit to do Atlantis, there was in the heads of agreement that the airport here had to be rebuilt, and Bahama, part of their deal was that the road from the airport had to be built to come to Bahama. So the government has a role to play, right? And again, through private-public economic agreements, you can go in and develop the airports in the family islands and proper access points with docks. And if you go to Long Island today to try to go fishing, just to launch a fishing boat is a challenge. And most of the people make a living fishing, and you have no proper ramps to launch a fishing boat.
Right. So basic infrastructure is a challenge. We have this chicken and egg situation, right? Where, you need the infrastructure in there to facilitate development, but people aren't willing to basically facilitate development without the infrastructure.
Right.
How can we begin to solve these issues? You mentioned it's private sector and public sector coming together.
Right. So what happens is once that commitment is made by the developer, and they start spending, then the government knows that they have to do their part.
Right.
So it's okay, developer, you're committed, and now we have to figure out a way to do our part. And then our part, we can go into the market and raise capital and offer Bahamians and investors to offset some of that cost, right? And again, Atlanta's used a part of that model with the airport, and Bahama used a part of the model with the highway, right? So the government had to perform, and they went out and they raised the money to do it.
Right.
The family island should be a focus. I think if there is an opportunity for the country to maybe get out of debt. An interesting discussion that's coming up, Brian, is carbon credits. I'm not sure if you're familiar with, have you heard that? Talk about that.
I've heard there's some discussions. And what capacity is that?
So
coming up?
Carbon credits is a way by a country that's heavy in manufacturing or has a lot of issues with carbon emissions. In order for them to meet certain international standards, they have to buy carbon credits, I think is kind of what the language is, because I've just been getting into it, right? So
which basically offsets their carbon footprint, right?
There you go.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
So now the Bahamas has got to be one of the most beautiful carbon-friendly places in the world.
That's right.
So how do we take a development that is carbon credit friendly and feasibility, scale it up to be able to sell it, our seabed leases, and make money, right? So the government, maybe that's an area that we can focus on. Anyway, I just wanted to bring it up because I find it fascinating that it doesn't stop the people from polluting, but they have to go out and buy carbon credits. So there's an economic model there with this business.
Right.
And I would think that our seabeds and our waters and our beautiful beaches and sand have a lot of carbon value.
Yeah, I mean, let's look at that for a moment. Like some of the, I guess, alternative spaces that can be utilized to spur some commercial activity, economic activity. So apart from seabeds, what other type of resources do you think can be utilized to attract purchasers? Revenue. Yeah.
Well, one thing that I've written about and studied extensively is sort of the maritime industry.
Yes.
Right. So. Just to give you some background, and again, just my own as a citizen with a sort of a mind. I'm no professional, but the typical profile is that somebody cruises into the Bahamas and they pay a $300 a year cruising fee. So let's just sort of start there, right? $300 a year to cruise our waters. I just think that number just doesn't make any sense. It's not feasible, right? How do we make money off of that?
Yes.
We know that a huge population of the yachting world frequents the Bahamas. We see all the mega yachts. We see the marinas full, which is good, paying dockage, paying certain things. But then the part that there's two parts that we need to pay attention to, is that these yachts come into our country. They rent them, I don't know, Brian, let's just use $50,000, $100,000 a week, right? They're paying us $300 a year, right? And their rent, and you chuckle, right? So the Bahamas, we need to figure out how do we capture some of that income, or how do we charge them more to basically run a hotel in our country, right? By using our waters. How do we get revenue from a very lucrative, very luxury segment of the economy? And then you add to it that as an American owner of a yacht, just think about this, we go back to the taxes, everything to do with that yacht, from being able to buy it, to operate it, to staff it, they get the write-off on their taxes. So they buy the yacht, offset against their taxes. They pay $300 a year to us, and then they make $500,000 a year renting it out. And I just think that is a segment that I've felt that we should sort of do a little bit better job in collecting money in that segment.
It makes sense because they're already coming here, right? And,
a lot.
Yeah, and they're not, it's really not a heavy burden, the $300. Yeah, I think there's some wiggle room in there to make some money. I agree. That's interesting. That's very interesting. So from the first segment as well, you were talking about some development in Nassau, right? In terms of, carving out, basically providing additional infrastructure in key areas, mainly in the southwestern region, so that area can be utilized. What would you say would be some of the good or ideal type of uses for that land in the back there?
In the southwest segment? Yeah. I mean, you've already got a number of affordable sort of gated communities in those areas. You know, gated communities sort of attract sort of a premium price, and it just gives people a sense of safety and then community as well. And what we're noticing in certain waterfront gated communities like Venice Bay, Southern Seas, some Coal Harbor, is that the international buyers now finding their way there, because it's your ability to be on the water, on the northern sector or the northwest sector. The price points are just so expensive, and then if you can get on a canal or a waterfront, it's attracting the international buyer now. So that's a good indicator that there's growth on the way. And again, if anybody is looking to buy real estate, that's why you engage a professional real estate broker or an agent to find these things out, because this is where you want to be investing.
Right.
This is where you want to be getting the opportunity to invest in real estate with a lot of potential for upside, right? But the Southwest sector is the new sector for Bahamians. And you look at it as sort of that middle class, mobile, lower middle, upper middle class that's ready to move up, because the north, you know, all of the gated communities along the coast and going towards Life at Key, those price points are somewhat hard to reach. That's more sort of the low upper class, you know, type price market. And I just think that urban planning, a responsibility by government, will help everybody, Bahamians who want to invest in that area, kind of have some level of success.
Indeed, indeed. So in terms of new development, I totally agree. We have to be smart in how we do these things. Because if we look at some of the older areas, right? Let's look at downtown, for example, right? It's I guess we've seen that there's been a deterioration in many areas. You know, we just saw the result of that with a big fire
the
on
fire.
Cumberland Street a couple of days ago, right? And that's simply the result of neglect of some of these buildings and so on. Why do you think that problem is so difficult to address?
I think it's enforcement of the ability to enforce maybe covenants. Most downtown historical areas in the world, if you travel to them, you'll see all the buildings sort of restored at a certain level. You'll see them pristine and very part of the culture, where people want to go and visit, and tourists and businesses thrive. But here, there's really no enforcement for the government to say, you know, if you don't fix your building up, the state has the right to do something. Either fix it up and give you the bill, or take the property from you, and without enforcement, especially for an area like the city district, that is our culture. I mean, when you see buildings that are a couple hundred years old that are just falling apart, because the rule is that if you do renovate them, you have to renovate them at a standard.
Right. They have to be restored, essentially.
Restored.
Yes.
And people are saying, well, I don't have the money to do it. There's no return, the ability to make profit, because that stuff is expensive. So why not just let it deteriorate, right? And it, as you can see, the eyesore just warrants a solution that nobody's really found yet.
Right, and I mean, it's a big problem that basically seems to be causing a vicious cycle, because you see more and more buildings in this state. Right now, if this is something that I guess perpetuates, you know, continually, which it has been, you know, it's really going to have a negative effect on our ability to run a city. Right, and to compete internationally, right? I mean, it's also quite. I mean, if you look at the fact that there are developments already occurring, right, to kind of change the facade of downtown, from the Point, the boardwalk, the cruise port, etc. I mean, there's a lot of money being pumped into those areas, right? And I think we will see the economic benefits, but there's a drawback if it's not balanced.
And that's I'm glad how you ended. Balance is the way, right? So there's about $1 billion being spent within a 2-mile radius. So let's do the math. The port, 250 million. The point, 270 million. The U.S. Embassy, 300 million. The new court systems, I'm not sure, 80 million.
Right, and the central bank as well.
Central bank.
Yes.
So if you start adding up, and that's a lot of money in a very concentrated area.
Yes.
But what happens is, in order to share in the wealth, it's all about, how do you get, 6 million feet to sort of disperse in an even manner? Because the typical profile of a cruise ship person is they stay west of East Street, right? There's no enticement or traffic flow or something that takes the tourist beyond that. Right. And that is what will help any businessman who goes to spend money. You need the foot traffic. So again, urban planning, maybe pedestrian-only roads, or some sort of a shift in traffic, or something has to give, right? And I think there's a lot smarter people out there than in this space than myself or you, but we know there is a problem. Right?
Certainly.
And I think the government, I think there are a lot of incentives for people, and again, we should know this, and this should be promoted heavily, that if you live in the city and you own a property and you develop it, then what does that look like? Do you get duty free? Do you get real property tax free? Do you get special financing? What is out there? And I'm sure there's stuff, but the public probably needs to know about it.
Right,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I'm sure there's new and creative ways to actually, approach financing in a novel way, approach PPPs, right, public-private partnerships, in a way that just haven't been done before. One of the ways I've seen around the world, people implementing the use of technology, right? Like blockchain technology, for example, to allow for tokenization of real estate, where basically you can pulverize the investor base and spread it out such that people are pooling their resources, right? And almost crowdfunding economic development on a much larger scale than any one individual could accomplish on their own, right? There's a couple success stories, I think, around the world. And what do you think about bringing those types of technologies into the real estate sector here?
And it's sort of a futuristic conversation, I think, is what you said, right? Anything to do with crypto. Arawak X, I was on the phone with them coming here. I salute them in their concept of crowdfunding.
Yes.
I'm getting to know more about that. With regards to crypto and blockchain, we have some quite amazing group of Bahamians that are very advanced in this field, because I've taken on an initiative to learn more about it. You've been involved in some of those conversations. And, crypto should be in the forefront of a lot of our conversations as a country.
Yes.
I think crypto should be talked about, and even in your business, creating funds and blockchain and all those things. We need to grab our youth, engage them in this conversation now,
Yes.
And get them up to speed. And I think that is a way for us to get to that first world status quicker than we might think about.
Indeed. Yeah, so from the crowdfunding standpoint, I think, the mechanisms are there. They just need to be tested.
They need to be tested.
Exactly. And as a matter of fact, beyond just a cryptocurrency, blockchain technology as well is proven to be useful in terms of providing what you call a universal source of truth, right? And nothing's more important than when it comes to land title, right?
Right.
So that's an issue you mentioned earlier, that it's a cumbersome process. We don't have a refined system. It needs revamping, right? Do you think that the government has the appetite to overhaul the land registry using blockchain technology?
I think we should make it an act. That's how serious it should be. Obviously, it will impact. Unfortunately, there's a sector of the economy that would be impacted if we had proper title. The lawyers,
Yes.
right? And they validate their fees and in all respect, and that's just the system. But through technology and through the proper use of technology, it's time to embrace that and to make the process of land registry easier, more functional, and more transparent.
Right. Well, I mean, the fees are high because it's the nature of the system, right? As you mentioned,
system,
right? So if you change the system, right, perhaps the fees do come down, okay, but maybe the lawyers make more money in the end because perhaps they're doing more transactions more efficiently.
There you go.
Right?
That's a very open-minded, smart way of thinking about it, right? Instead of just keeping the same old and all those complexities, because there is technology, there is the blockchain, there is the method. When I go to a developer, I always encourage them, if you're going to do this development in the Bahamas, first thing you do is get title insurance, right? Because we don't get caught up in the process of checking title. And that makes transactions very fluid. Some people get it, some don't. But that is, so the next step now is what we're talking about. Right. And that should just be throughout the Bahamas, right?
Throughout the Bahamas, exactly. Right. So in terms of the way forward, in terms of, let's say, developing the real estate sector to be more efficient, more fluid, and just more accessible. You know, we touched on a number of potential initiatives, but specifically in terms of business initiatives from your standpoint, MCR. What are your plans, I guess, say for this year in terms of you know, developing your practice?
And as far as the real estate sector,
yes.
And well, we're in a very competitive business, right? So we have over 1,000 licensed agents in our business, over 1,000. So you have to stay up to speed with the new technology. We have to explore the crypto space. The Bahamas needs to know that there have been some major real estate transactions done in buying crypto.
Right.
The process of converting crypto to fiat, that's the language that we should all be familiar with. That should be everyday table talk at this point. And there are deals that's happening. We talked about, you know, what ways can we attract more investors? And a discussion I've had with you and Andrew is how do we get persons to facilitate and easier to become a permanent resident in the Bahamas through creating crypto-based funds or just investment funds in general, because you are a fund manager. That is what you do. We have a floor in the system that what happens is called flipping. So a foreigner can come in, pay $750,000, become a permanent resident. He could sell the property the minute he gets his residency. And then when he sells, he still gets to keep it. We have no way of taking it away from him, right? So why does he need to buy the property in the first place if he can have a permanent residence without owning it?
Right. It leaves it open for abuse, right?
Right.
The existing program.
Right.
Right.
So I see that you know, the permanent resident market, because a lot of our tax structures, which are totally transparent, and they meet all of the OECD and all of those requirements. If we had a different business model to attract that permanent resident type buyer, we can probably help you know, a lot of segments of the economy. Remember, every time the real estate transaction happens, it creates 3 full-time jobs.
Absolutely.
That's the domino effect. So if we can find ways to attract more investors, and I'll go on record, $750,000 today for a permanent residence I think is too cheap, right? The government makes $10,000 off of every permit that they issue. I think that's too cheap. So I think you know, there's just ways that we can take a look at that.
Interesting. So, in fact, you know, if you were to increase the buy-in, right, for permanent residency, that would, I guess, leave some more room for the average Bahamian to buy on the lower end of the market, correct?
Good point.
Because that's one of the I guess, criticisms of this policy that I've heard over past years, is that with that price point, which used to be a bit lower, used to be $500,000.
Actually started at $250,000.
Right,
yeah.
And they kept pushing it up.
Right.
For that reason.
Right.
And so because Bahamians were, in fact, I guess, being squeezed in certain sectors,
yeah.
Right? But you know, this goes back, I think, to one of the points you made earlier, that we have to expand the development and create communities for different segments, right? So the domestic segment, that's one segment. But if we focus now on international buyers, right, and we basically bring them in on the higher end of the market, that could actually boost the economy quite a bit, couldn't it?
A lot, Brian.
Right.
A lot, because you realize that there's a reason why they're becoming a permanent resident here. It's not for the sun, sand, and sea. Believe me,
Right.
that's not it. It's strictly for financial planning,
Right.
right? So they become a resident of the Bahamas. They become tax neutral for wherever country they're from.
Right.
And the typical profile in a lot of instances is they have a deal that's going on somewhere out there that they will have to pay a lot of taxes on, capital gains or whatever type of tax, if it's executed, if they stay in their country. So let's just say if they sell their business, say for $1 billion, right? And they have to give away 50% of that. They come to the Bahamas, they become a resident, they pay nothing, right? So what if we went up on the cost to become a permanent resident, related to how much we save them in whatever tax that they're trying to save, the numbers don't line up, right? We're just giving it away. I think $750 is too low. I really do.
Indeed.
And the other part of that, I think if we're giving away permanent residents, is not giving them away, but selling them. I think there should be a mandatory contribution to some sort of a sovereign wealth fund.
Right.
That would help Bahamians in all of our community-based facilities for all of the things that we have, the social monies that we need that we're underfunded.
Right.
As a matter of fact, with the Christie administration, and I lobbied heavily with them to say that whenever a developer comes into the Bahamas, a certain percentage of whatever they spend, let's say Bahama was $4 billion, a certain percentage of that needs to go into a socially neutral, not political fund to help the Bahamas develop our hospitals, medical clinics. If it's in Eleuthera, same thing, Exuma. So, 10%, 1%, 2%. Typical profile was, well, we don't want to scare them away, which I disagree with, right? And if they go anywhere else in the world to do a development, they are obligated to build schools, libraries, or have some social connectivity to an investment.
Right.
In order to get approvals.
Well, I mean, the fact is, people respond to incentives, right? And if we put the right incentive systems in place, I think we'll get the right outcomes, right? So thank you so much for your candid responses and your active involvement today. It was really wonderful having you on my show.
My pleasure, Brian. Yeah, man, it's good to see you.
Yes, thank you. So good evening, and thank you for joining us on Jones & Company today, which was brought to you by MCR, Better Homes and Gardens, and Agio Digital. Have a good night.